They forgot my birthday dinner. But what they didn't know was that forgetting me would change everything. My name is Helen Carter. I am 78 years old. I have lived long enough to know the taste of joy and the weight of quiet. I have taught children to read, watched gardens grow, and learned how small acts can mean the most. Tonight, I will tell you a story that began with an empty chair and ended with a table full of new life. I remember birthdays like small lanterns along a long road. When my children were young, the house would glow with candles and laughter. We would sing off-key and clap too loudly. My husband would hide the cake in the pantry and pretend he had forgotten, just to see the surprise on their faces. Those nights were ordinary and perfect. Time changes the road. Children grow into their own lives. Jobs and distances and new families pull at them. Promises are made with good intentions, and then life moves on. It happens slowly until one day you look up and the room is quieter than it used to be. On the morning of my birthday, I woke early. I made tea and sat by the window while the sun warmed the porch. I set the table with the china my mother gave me, the one with tiny blue flowers along the rim. I folded the napkins the way she taught me. I placed a single candle in the center. I did not want a fuss. I only wanted the sound of voices, the comfort of familiar footsteps, the ordinary noise of family. I wanted to be seen. All day I moved slowly through the house preparing. I made a pot roast with carrots and onions and a splash of red wine. I baked a simple cake so the kitchen smelled like celebration. I set a place for Robert, for Emily, and a small saucer for Laura. As evening came, I kept busy polishing silver, arranging flowers, checking the oven. I poured a glass of wine and read a letter from an old friend. I told myself not to worry. People get delayed. Work runs late. Traffic happens. But the first hour passed, and then the second. The house grew quieter. The clock ticked, and the shadows lengthened. I called Robert and left a gentle message. I called Emily and left another. I said the roast would be warm when they arrived. There is a particular kind of silence that presses against you. It is heavy and expectant. I sat at the table and listened to my own breath. I watched the candle flame lean toward the draft from the window. I felt the small ache of disappointment. Then came a soft knock at the door. It was George Miller standing there, his coat buttoned against the chill. He held a small thermos and a loaf of bread wrapped in a tea towel. His face was lined with years and kindness. "Happy birthday, Helen," he said, and his voice was steady like a hand on the back of a chair. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, the way neighbors do when they have known each other for decades. He sat down at the table and looked at the empty chairs with a softness that made my throat tighten. We ate together in a quiet way, not because we were lonely, but because we had chosen to be present for one another. George told me about the time his wife surprised him with a fishing trip when he turned 60. He spoke of small joys and small regrets, of the way the years had taught him to notice the little things. I told him about the letter from my husband and how his words had settled into me like a warm shawl. As we sat on the porch with cups of tea after dinner, George said something that stayed with me. Sometimes being forgotten is not the end. Sometimes it is the beginning of seeing yourself clearly. That night, I did not sleep much. I lay awake and listened to the house breathe. I thought of the woman across the street who always swept her porch alone. I thought of the man at the bus stop who read the same paper every day. I thought of the young mother who juggled a stroller and groceries and looked as if she had not slept in a week. The idea came slowly, like a seed pushing through soil. What if I set another table? What if I invited those who might be sitting at their own empty tables? It felt both daring and simple, the kind of thing my husband would have liked. The next morning I wrote a short note on a piece of stationery and slipped it under the door of the woman across the street. I left another at the community center. I called George and asked if he would come and bring a friend. I did not know if anyone would come. I only knew that I could not keep waiting for life to be handed to me. The first evening, 3 people arrived. They came slowly, as if stepping into a room they had not been sure belonged to them. One was a widow named Margaret who had lived in town for 40 years and still set a place for her husband at the table every night. One was a veteran named Tom who had a quiet way of speaking and a laugh that came out like a small surprise. The third was a young woman named Sarah who had recently moved back to care for her aging mother and carried a tiredness that made her eyes look older than her years. We sat around my table with bowls of soup and slices of bread. At first the conversation was careful, the way people speak when they are testing the water. Then Margaret told a story about a summer she and her husband had spent on a lake, how they had learned to fish with their hands and laughed until their sides ached. Tom spoke of a friend he had lost and how he kept a small photograph in his wallet. Sarah told us about the long nights of caregiving and the small victories that felt like miracles. As the stories unfolded, the room changed. The chairs felt less like furniture and more like places of belonging. Laughter came easier. Tears came too, and we passed tissues without fuss. When the evening ended, the three of them lingered on the porch, reluctant to leave the warmth we had made together. They promised to come again, and they did. Word spread slowly, the way good things do in a small town. People began to come not just for the food but for the company. They brought casseroles and pies, photographs and letters. They brought stories that smelled of smoke and summer, of first jobs and first loves, of mistakes and the lessons that followed. Each person who came added a new thread to the tapestry we were weaving. One man named Henry came for weeks and then stopped. He had a stubbornness that kept him from asking for help, and one evening he told me he could not come because he felt ashamed of needing company. I walked to his house and sat on his porch until he opened the door. We did not speak much. I brought him a loaf of bread and left it on his table. The next week he came back, quieter than before, but he came. As the dinners continued, the table grew longer. Chairs were added, and with them came new voices and new stories. People who had been strangers became friends. The woman across the street started a knitting circle. The man from the bus stop began a small vegetable patch and gave away the extra tomatoes. The young mother found someone who could watch her child for an hour so she could rest. The dinners did not solve every problem, but they made the load lighter. Laura began to visit more often. She would sit with her sketchbook and quietly capture the faces around the table. Her drawings were honest and kind. She caught the way a smile creased at the corner or how someone's hands trembled when they reached for a cup. She said she wanted to remember us as we were. Her paintings found their way onto the wall, and when people saw themselves in those pages, they sat a little straighter. Robert and Emily came too, at first out of obligation and then out of curiosity. They watched as neighbors who had never met each other found common ground. They listened to stories about their mother that they had never heard, small, ordinary things that revealed a life lived fully. One evening, as the candles were lit and the room was warm with stories, Laura stood up and asked if she could show something. She unrolled a large sheet of paper. On it were portraits of every face around the table, drawn with a tenderness that made my chest ache. When she finished, the room grew still in the most beautiful way. Robert cleared his throat and stood. He spoke quietly, not with grand words but with honesty. He said, "Mom, I'm sorry I wasn't there that night. I thought I had time. I didn't realize how much I was missing." Emily took his hand and Laura leaned in with a smile. I forgave them, not because I had to, but because forgiveness felt like the only honest thing to do. It opened a door that had been closed for too long. It did not erase the past, but it made room for a future where we could be present for one another. From that night on, the table became more than just dinners. It became a place of return. There were nights that tested us in ways I had not expected. One winter evening a storm rolled in, and the power went out. The house grew dark and the wind made the windows sing. People arrived by flashlight, wrapped in coats, carrying casseroles and blankets. We lit every candle we could find and told stories by their light. For a while the storm outside felt like a companion to the storm inside, memories and grief and a small stubborn hope that kept us talking until the lights came back on. On another night, a disagreement flared over something small and silly, a recipe of all things. Voices rose for a moment, and the room felt brittle. Then someone began to tell a joke, and laughter broke the tension like sunlight through clouds. We learned that conflict is part of being human. It does not mean the end of community. It means we are alive enough to care. We learn to apologize and to listen and to make room for different tastes and different memories. We also learned to share the work. At first I did most of the cooking and the calling and the cleaning. It was a habit I had carried for years. But community means shared responsibility. People began to bring dishes, to sign up for a week, to take turns washing the pots. A retired schoolteacher offered to organize a simple schedule. A young man who liked to bake volunteered to bring bread every other week. The work became part of the ritual, and the ritual became part of the healing. Before each dinner, someone would light the candle and say a short line, sometimes a poem, sometimes a memory. We called it the lighting. It was not religious. It was a way to mark the moment and say we are here together now. After the lighting, we would go around the table and each say one small thing we were grateful for that week. Gratitude is a quiet medicine. It does not fix everything, but it changes the way you look at what you have. We kept a small fund for rides and heating bills and bus tickets when the weather turned dangerous. We arranged carpools and moved a few dinners to the community hall when stairs became too much for someone. We learned to ask gently how we could make it easier and to accept the answer without pride. These small adjustments made the table welcoming to more people. As the seasons turned, our circle grew more confident. People began to bring their own projects. One man started a small woodworking bench in my garage and taught others how to sand and finish a simple shelf. A woman who had been a nurse offered a short talk on medication safety. A retired accountant helped a neighbor sort through paperwork and find a missing pension form. The dinners became a place not only for comfort, but for practical help and learning. We invited the high school choir to sing at a summer picnic. The children ran through the grass, while the elders watched with a kind of astonished joy. We partnered with the library for a reading program, and students came to listen to stories from people who had lived through different decades. Those visits changed both sides. The young people learned that history is not only in books. It is in the faces and the hands of those who lived it. We learned that youth brings a kind of urgency and hope that can lift the heaviest days. Through it all, I kept a small notebook where I wrote down things people said, little lines of wisdom, jokes that made us laugh, recipes that became favorites. Sometimes I would read from the notebook at the beginning of a dinner, and we would all nod and remember. Those small rituals kept us connected to the past while we built something new. The forgotten birthday that had once felt like an ending had become a doorway to a life I had not expected. It taught me that when something is taken away, the world sometimes gives you the chance to build something new. If you are listening and wondering how to begin, start with one small step. Choose a regular day and time that works for most people. Make something simple, a pot of soup, a loaf of bread, a kettle of tea. Invite just one person who might be sitting alone tonight. Ask one gentle question that opens a story. What was your favorite summer as a child? Or who taught you how to make your best meal? Then listen more than you speak. Keep a small notebook and write down the things people say. Those words will become the map of your own community. Make the space easy and welcoming. Use sturdy chairs. Keep the lighting soft but bright enough to see faces. Have a small fund for rides or heating if someone needs it. Share the work from the very first night. Let others bring a dish or wash the plates. Community is not something one person carries alone. It is something we build together, one meal at a time. Years later, the table is still here. Every Thursday, the candles are lit. New faces arrive and old friends return. We laugh, we cry, we pass the bread. We remember we are not alone. Robert and Emily now come because they want to, not because they feel they must. Laura's portraits hang on the wall, and every time someone sees themselves in those lines, they sit a little straighter. The forgotten birthday that once felt like an ending became a doorway to a life I never imagined. If you have a table that sometimes feels empty, set one more place. Light a candle. Invite someone who might be sitting alone. You do not need a perfect plan or a fancy menu. You only need a willingness to be present and to listen. The rest will follow, one small step at a time. I am Helen Carter. I am 78 years old. I have learned that a forgotten dinner can change everything, not by erasing the past, but by opening a door to a future where we choose to show up, to listen, and to love. If you have a story of your own, a time you felt forgotten, and how you found your way back, share it. Tell us. We will listen. We will learn. We will sit together.